Welcome to Tea Time, a conversation regarding emerging market multinationals, emerging markets issues. Today, we have here with us one of the students in my class, Fernanda, who did a tremendous job with his classmates on Cemex, one of the biggest cement companies in the world, a Mexican company, and now a very global one. What did you learn about Cemex, Fernanda, while doing the homework for the class?
So I think the history of Cemex has several key takeaways. I think the first one is the path to internationalization. So they started in Mexico, they basically got most of the market there, and then they went to their natural market, which was the US. Then they did another key movement that was going into Spain. And once they were in Spain, this was a milestone for them because they could get cheaper debt from Spain, and this really fueled the growth that they continued to have. Then they continued to play with other countries in Latin America, in Asia. They had some hit and some misses, but they were really became experts in M&A. So they developed what they called the Cemex way, that basically allowed them to integrate new companies in just a couple of months versus other companies that might take them years to face the issues. However, when they continued to move, they bought Rinker in Australia. And this became kind of problematic for them because it seemed like the Cemex way was no longer a one-size-fits-all approach. They had a lot of debt, they had a lot of different markets. Also, the economy was not moving as it had been in previous years. So they had some issues working with this. They also ended up paying a very high price for this company, higher than they initially thought. And some of the key things that I thought when I was doing this, there were several aspects. First, Mr. Zambrano, he was very overconfident about Cemex and their abilities, even though it's a great company, they had proven to be successful. He should have foreseen that this was not going to go on forever, and he should have remembered better were his natural markets. Like Brazil, at the time of the case, they had not been into Brazil. That would normally be a natural market for them. Another issue was they kind of failed to identify what were the key things that were not longer working in the Cemex way. So we saw this in two occasions before the issue with Rinker, where they saw things were not working quite well, but they were not very fast, they were not very good in adapting. So this really complicated when they made the purchase of Rinker. So in a nutshell, they were great in M&A, but this led to overconfidence, and they were not good in adapting their ways to new markets, to new clients, and to new economic situations.
I always say in my class that emerging multinationals go international to learn, sometimes also to reduce the risk of their home markets, and that's the case in Cemex. Cemex, as you are saying, was getting the financing through Spain, so through a Spanish subsidiary. So as a Spanish subsidiary, then the access to that was easier and cheaper. So that was definitely solved. But this question about learning, about being flexible, about incorporating whatever you bring from other markets, as you are saying, Cemex at first was very good, but then they failed, they became overconfident, and they were unable to absorb part of the learnings. How do you see the company looking forward?
Yes. So, and I think besides what we said about overconfidence and failing to adapt, there were two other key things. The US housing market was going down. They were losing ownership of their plant in Venezuela. So they were also losing one key bridge they had to South America. So there were also a lot of externalities that they could have hedged for. But when we started to think about what they could do, we were thinking about this on a lens of how risky it was and also how how much expertise did they have on this. And so we leveraged different options. The first one was having more organic growth and reducing their leverage. So can they penetrate deeper the markets that they're currently in? Can they create capabilities in some of the areas that they have? And also try to understand, are there any assets that maybe are not worthy of having anymore? Because when companies grow so fast through M&A, sometimes they end up with a lot of assets that they don't need and might not be as productive. And also utilization can be capacity of a plant can be moved to another one that might be cheaper. So that's one of the options. The other option that we thought about was M&A in some emerging markets, and especially focusing in what I mentioned previously, going to Brazil. Brazil was right around the corner. It's their own market. We know it also gives the company a great bridge because it has such a big coastline, and which allows them to have cheaper imports. But given the familiarity with the market, they could have succeeded well in Brazil. And as well, they could have improved their success stories in some of the places in Southeast Asia, and even think about how to solve governmental issues that like the ones they faced in Indonesia. The other options that we thought about were the BRIC countries, and I already mentioned Brazil, but we thought about Russia. Russia is a huge market. However, it was very highly fragmented in terms of who was providing these kind of products. Then we also had China. And we had the issue that China doesn't have the same expertise of quality in the products that they have, and they did not necessarily want to pay for it. And then we had India, that is a huge country and has infrastructure issues that if you're thinking about moving cement around the entire country, it gets very complicated. And also Cemex is an expert in more higher quality products. So maybe going into India with a lower acquisition power, they might not be able to go very successfully in the industry. And then the other one that we thought was on the other spectrum of maybe where they would have less expertise would be developing more in the developed markets. However, when we thought about this, we looked at Europe and we saw that other companies like Holcim were had been there for a long time. They already had their clientele. So it would prove complicated for them to actually end up going in the market. And it would also, could potentially face loss or suits about how they were colluding or they were getting too big in a specific country. So in order to make the decision of what we thought about, we developed decision criteria, and some were regarding a company if they decided to do M&A, and the country if they decided to go into a new region. When we thought about the country, we thought about the growth of the country, the infrastructure, the regulation, taxes, and also ability to get in and outside the country. And then when we thought about the company, if they want to acquire a new one, they always acquire big players. So what is the market share of the company? Who are they selling to? What do their cash flows look like? And what is the strength that this company is going to have in the future? And how well is it equipped to deal with externalities like the ones we mentioned before? So we decided at the end that our recommendation was going to be to expand further in the markets that they're currently in, try to gain more market share, and besides this, take advantage of Brazil. It's just right there. They have a lot of access. They just lost this bridge in Venezuela, so going into Brazil will allow them to regain the bridge that they have into South America, and it's also one of the biggest markets in Latin America.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. The discussion is very important today because the US-Canada-Mexico agreement, the NAFTA successor, has just been signed on the day before yesterday. So this agreement provides stability for companies like Cemex that are both in Mexico and the US, provides also a framework in which companies can adjust, can work for the medium and the long term, and of course validates Mexican investments also in the US, like the ones by Cemex. So I think these externalities that you were saying are favorable. The peso has strengthened, the Mexican currency, and looks bright for the future. And then we see, because of all these externalities that are on the positive side, plus all the talent of the firm, all the innovations that the firm has introduced over the years, we see a bright future for Cemex within the building materials industry. Thank you so much, Fernanda.
Thank you.
Thank you.